The old man stood by the window, his reflection a pale ghost against the glass, a stranger in his own home. Rain lashed at the panes, each droplet a tiny fist beating against the world he had built. Inside, the sound was muffled, not by the quality of the insulation he had so carefully chosen decades ago, but by the cacophony of invasion. Boxes, a legion of brown cardboard soldiers, were stacked in strategic positions, cordoning off sections of the living room, their blank faces a testament to the erasure of his life. Young men in brightly colored uniforms, hired movers with blank expressions, maneuvered his furniture with an impersonal efficiency that felt more brutal than any overt act of violence. To them, the mahogany desk wasn't the place where he had signed the contract that saved a local factory, nor was the worn armchair throne from which he had read stories to his daughter, his voice a low rumble against the stormy nights of her childhood. They were just objects, obstacles on a checklist. He watched as a burly mover carelessly nudged a small, framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It tilted, then fell face down with a muffled clatter. No one else noticed. The old man's jaw tightened, a subtle shift of muscle beneath weathered skin, but he said nothing. He didn't move. He just watched. A sharp, grating voice cut through the organized chaos. "Dad, are you just going to stand there? You could at least be packing your personals." It was Amelia, his daughter-in-law, her arms crossed, her face a mask of strained patience. She saw an obstinate old man, a relic refusing to accept the inevitable march of progress, the practicalities of the modern world. She saw him as a problem to be managed, a final, dusty item to be cleared out before her new life could begin. To her, to the movers, to the world that bustled and screamed outside this quiet sanctuary of memory, he was just an old man, a footnote in a story that was no longer his. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend as they dismantled his world piece by piece, was that the very foundation beneath their feet, the sturdy beams above their heads, the silent, watching walls around them, all held a secret. They were standing in the heart of a legend, and they were in the presence of the man who had forged it. They thought they were taking his house, but they had no idea what the house truly was, or the nature of the man who had given it life. His silence was not weakness. It was a fortress. And within that fortress, a plan, meticulously crafted with the same precision he had once used to draft the blueprints for this very structure, was quietly ticking toward its final, stunning revelation. The air was thick with the scent of packing tape and the bitter perfume of endings. Welcome to our channel. If you believe that honor and dignity are treasures that can never be taken, and that the quietest souls often hold the most powerful truths, then be sure to subscribe and ring the bell, because this is a story you will not want to forget. The man's name was Arthur. To the neighborhood kids who sometimes cut across his lawn, he was Mr. Thompson, the old man in the brick house who never seemed to leave. To the mailman, he was just a name on a bundle of letters, mostly bills and advertisements now. His life had contracted, shrinking from the grand. Sprawling epic at once was to a few quiet, repeated verses. He woke with the sun, the same pale light he had watched creep over the horizon for 50 years in this house. He would make his coffee, a simple black drip, and sit in the kitchen, the linoleum cool beneath his feet even in summer. The room was a museum of a shared life. Faint, ghostly outlines on the walls showed where his wife, Eleanor, had hung dozens of pictures, a chaotic gallery of school photos, holidays, and blurry, joyous moments. He had never moved them after she was gone. He had simply let them fade, like memories, until only their shapes remained, visible only to him. The house was his anchor, his fortress of solitude. He knew its every secret, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind to the old oak tree he had planted as a sapling on his daughter's first birthday. He had built this house not with contractors and laborers, but with his own 2 hands, alongside a small, loyal crew of friends who believed in his vision. The bricks were laid with precision that bordered on obsession. The wooden beams, salvaged from an old, dismantled bridge, were planed and set by his own skilled hands. He had mixed the mortar, wired the electricity, and laid the plumbing. Every nail was a period at the end of a sentence. Every window a carefully framed stanza in the poem of his life with Eleanor. It was more than a structure of wood and stone. It was a physical manifestation of his love, a testament to a promise he had made to her on a rainy afternoon much like this one. when they were young and had nothing but each other. "I'll build you a house so strong," he had whispered, his hands holding hers, "that no storm could ever shake it. A place where our roots can grow so deep they become part of the earth." And he had. But now, new storms were gathering, not of wind and rain, but of greed and ignorance. The story of how this storm arrived was a simple, tragically common one. His daughter, his only child, had passed away years ago, leaving behind a son, Michael, whom Arthur had helped raise. Michael was a good boy, but soft, easily swayed, and he had fallen in love with Amelia. Amelia was a woman of sharp edges and sharper ambitions. She saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, of upgrades and optimizations. She saw Arthur's house not as a home, a sanctuary of memory, but as an undervalued piece of real estate in an increasingly desirable neighborhood. She saw the sprawling garden where Eleanor had grown her prize-winning roses not as a living memorial, but as wasted square footage. In her mind, the house was a dead asset, a relic of a bygone era, much like the man who occupied it. Her campaign had been subtle at first, a series of gentle suggestions wrapped in the language of concern. "Dad, this house is so big for just one person. The upkeep must be a fortune. Wouldn't you be more comfortable in a modern, secure apartment complex? With a community?" Arthur would just nod, his eyes distant, his response a quiet, "I'm fine here. Amelia." But Amelia was not one to be deterred by quiet resistance. She saw it as stubbornness, as an old man's foolish pride. She began to work on Michael, her voice a constant, persuasive whisper in his ear. She spoke of their future, of the family they wanted to have, of the financial security they needed. She painted a picture of a life unburdened by the past, a life of sleek, modern convenience. The old house, in her telling, became a ball and chain, holding them back from their true potential. Michael, caught between a love for his grandfather and the ambitions of his wife, eventually relented. He was a ship caught in a current too strong to fight. The decision was presented to Arthur not as a request, but as a foregone conclusion. They sat him down in his own living room, the room of 1,000 memories, and laid out their plan on the coffee table he had built from a fallen cherry tree. Amelia did most of the talking, her voice smooth and professional, as if she were a consultant presenting a corporate restructuring proposal. "So, we found a wonderful place for you, Dad. It's called the Golden Sunset Villas. It's a premium assisted living facility. You'll have your own room, prepared meals, and round-the-clock medical staff. It's the best." She slid a glossy brochure across the table. The picture on the front showed a sterile, hotel-like building with a few smiling, silver-haired residents engaged in a game of checkers. Arthur looked at the brochure, then at his grandson's face, which was etched with painful, averted guilt. He didn't look at Amelia. He didn't need to. He could feel her dismissive certainty radiating across the small space between them. He finally picked up the brochure, his callous fingers tracing the manufactured smiles of the people in the picture. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had measured out the happiest years of his life. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, devoid of the anger or grief they had expected. "And the house?" he asked, his gaze still fixed on the brochure. Amelia smiled, a triumphant, relieved little smile. "That's the best part," she said, her voice bright. "My brother, you remember David? He and his family are looking to move. They love this area. We're going to let them have the house. It's perfect. It stays in the family, in a way." She said it as if she were bestowing a great gift, a clever solution that solved everyone's problems. She did not see the flicker of pain in Arthur's eyes, a flicker as brief and intense as a striking match. The idea that the sacred space, built as a monument to his love for Eleanor, would be handed over to strangers, to her family, was a desecration. It was a violation far deeper than simply being asked to leave. He had built a fortress to keep the storms out, but he had never imagined the storm would come from within. He placed the brochure back on the table, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked at Michael, a long, steady look that his grandson could not meet, and then he gave the only reply he could, a reply so simple, so devoid of protest, that it completely disarmed him. "I see," he said. And in that moment, In that quiet, two-word response, his plan was truly born. A plan not of anger or revenge, but of honor. A plan to protect the one thing he had left, the truth. The days that followed were a masterclass in quiet dignity and escalating ignorance. Amelia, emboldened by Arthur's seeming acquiescence, took charge with the fervor of a conquering general. She was a whirlwind of phone calls, schedules, and pronouncements. Her brother, David, and his wife, Karen, began to visit the house frequently, their presence an alien intrusion. They walked through the rooms with the air of new owners, discussing renovations and paint colors in loud, enthusiastic voices, often in front of Arthur himself. "We'll have to tear out this whole wall," David would say, gesturing at the beautiful wood-paneled study. "Open concept, you know." Karen would run her hand over Eleanor's carefully tended rose bushes in the garden and say, "I'm not much of a gardener. We'll probably just pave this over for a patio. Less maintenance." They spoke as if Arthur were deaf or already a ghost. They treated his home like a tear down, a blank canvas of their own, lesser vision. Arthur would watch them, sometimes from his armchair, sometimes from the kitchen doorway, his face an unreadable mask of stoicism. He never argued. He never corrected them. He would just give a small, almost imperceptible nod when they spoke to him directly, which was rare. His silence unnerved them, but they misinterpreted it as senility, as the sad, vacant acceptance of a man whose time had passed. They didn't understand that his silence was a shield, and behind it, he was listening, watching, and waiting. There was, however, one person who saw something more. A young woman named Chloe, a junior paralegal from the firm Amelia, had hired to handle the property transfer and Arthur's admission paperwork for the Golden Sunset Villas. Chloe had been sent to the house to get Arthur's signature on a few final documents. She was young, barely out of law school, and still possessed a sense of human decency that hadn't yet been eroded by her profession. When she arrived, Amelia greeted her at the door with a dismissive wave. "He's in the study. Just get him to sign on the dotted line. He can be a bit slow, so be patient." Chloe walked into the study, a room that felt different from the rest of the house. While the living room was being dismantled, the study remained untouched, a pocket of preserved time. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled not just with novels, but with thick, heavy tomes on engineering, architecture, and urban planning. On a large oak desk, amidst the organized clutter, sat a set of old, beautifully maintained drafting tools, a worn T-square, a set of German-made compasses, and several specialized rulers. They were tools of a master craftsman, not the idle possessions of a hobbyist. Arthur was sitting in a high-backed leather chair, looking at a large, rolled-up document on his desk. He looked up as Chloe entered, his eyes clear and intelligent, not slow or vacant as Amelia had suggested. "Miss," he said, his voice a quiet baritone. Chloe introduced herself, her professional confidence wavering slightly under his steady gaze. She explained the documents, a series of standard legal forms that would effectively sign away his rights to the property. He listened patiently, his hands folded on the desk. As she spoke, her eyes were drawn to a framed photograph on the wall she hadn't noticed before. It was an old black-and-white photo of a much younger Arthur, standing with a group of men in front of a newly constructed bridge. They were all smiling, covered in dirt and sweat, the pride radiating from them almost tangible. The man standing next to Arthur, with his arms slung around his shoulders, was a man Chloe recognized instantly from history books and the name of the city's largest park. Mayor Harrison, the visionary leader who had transformed the city in the post-war era. Arthur wasn't just in the picture. He was at the center of it, his hand resting on the central pylon of the bridge as if he were feeling its pulse. "Is that?" Chloe began, pointing to the photo. Arthur's gaze followed hers. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "A long time ago," he said softly. "He was a good man." He then turned his attention back to the papers on his desk. He picked up a pen, a simple, old fountain pen, and uncapped it. He looked at the line where his signature was required. Chloe felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to stop him. Something was wrong. The narrative Amelia had spun of a doddery old man being moved for his own good crumbled in the face of this quiet, dignified man and the silent testimony of the room around him. The books, the tools, the photograph. They all pointed to a life of profound significance, a life that was being casually and ignorantly erased. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you sure about this?" Arthur paused, the nib of the pen hovering just above the paper. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than stoic calm in his eyes. It was a deep, knowing sadness, but it was tinged with something else. Resilience. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. "A man's signature is his word," he said, his voice steady. "And I am a man of my word." He then signed the document with a firm, practiced hand. The signature was not the shaky scrawl of an infirm old man, but bold, elegant script, the signature of a man who had signed blueprints that had shaped the city. As Chloe took the signed papers, her hand trembling slightly, she knew she had just become a witness to a profound injustice. She was the observer, the audience surrogate, the first person to glimpse the truth, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the final act of the story had not yet been written. The day of the move was a bleak affair, orchestrated under a sky the color of slate. The movers, now familiar with the geography of Arthur's life, worked with final, grim efficiency. Each box that left the house felt like a punctuation mark in a final, tragic sentence. Amelia was in her element, directing proceedings with the confidence of a CEO overseeing a successful merger. Her brother David and his family were already there, their car parked possessively in the driveway. Their children ran through the emptying rooms, their shrieks echoing in the hollow space, a jarring soundtrack to the quiet dignity of Arthur's departure. The inciting incident, the final public humiliation, came when they began to clear out the study. It was the last bastion of his identity, the one room that had remained untouched until now. A young mover, eager to finish the job, grabbed a large, leather-bound portfolio that sat on Arthur's desk. It was heavy, and he grunted as he lifted it. "What's this thing?" "Full of rocks," he joked his partner. Amelia, overhearing, walked over. "Oh, that's just more of his old junk," she said, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Drawings and things. Probably just toss it." "No." Arthur's voice cut through the room, quiet but with an edge of cold steel that made everyone freeze. It was the first time he had shown any resistance, any hint of protest. All eyes turned to him. He stood in the doorway, his posture erect, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked directly at Amelia. "That portfolio stays," he said. It was not a request. Amelia was taken aback, flustered by this sudden, unexpected assertion of will. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. She felt her authority being challenged in front of the movers, in front of her brother's family. She decided to reassert her dominance. "Dad, be reasonable," she said, her voice taking on a patronizing, condescending tone. "It's just old papers. There's no room for it at the villas. What are you going to do with it? Let's not be sentimental." She gestured to the mover. "Just put it with the things for disposal." I said no. This time his voice was even quieter, yet it carried an undeniable weight that filled the entire house. The air grew thick with tension. The mover stood awkwardly, looking from Arthur to Amelia, unsure of whose orders to follow. Michael, his face pale with anxiety, tried to intervene. "Amelia, maybe we should just keep it for him." "In storage? Don't be ridiculous, Michael," she snapped, rounding on him. "We are not paying to store trash. This is exactly the kind of clutter we're trying to get away from." She then turned back to Arthur, her expression hardening into a mask of cruel pragmatism. She decided to mock him, to belittle his attachment in front of everyone, to crush this final pocket of resistance. "What is it, Dad? Your secret plan to become a famous artist in your old age? A bit late for that, don't you think?" Her brother, David, snickered. His wife smirked. The humiliation was complete. It was public, it was cruel, and it was aimed at the very heart of his legacy. Arthur's face remained impassive, but deep, weary sadness settled his eyes. He did not look at her. He looked at the portfolio, at the worn leather that contained the work of a lifetime. He had poured his soul onto those pages, designing not just buildings, but futures. He had solved problems of structure and flow that had stumped the best engineers of his day. And now, it was being dismissed as junk by a woman who could not see beyond the surface of things. He simply shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. "You don't understand," he said, his voice a near whisper, not to her, but to the room, to the house itself. The standoff was broken by the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway outside. It was a sound that did not belong to the day, a sound of weight and importance. One sleek black sedan, followed by another, and then a third, pulled up in front of the house. They were immaculate, their dark paint gleaming even under the dull, gray light. They parked in a neat, imposing line behind a moving truck, effectively blocking it in. The movers stopped their work, peering out the window. Amelia's condescending smile faltered, replaced by a look of confused irritation. "Who is that?" she muttered, annoyance clear in her tone. The back door of the lead car opened. A polished black shoe was planted firmly on the gravel. The rising action of this domestic drama had been a slow burn, a series of small cuts and condescending remarks that chipped away at Arthur's silent dignity. The disrespect had been consistent, almost mundane in its cruelty. David and Karen had become more audacious in their planning, openly debating whether to tear down the magnificent stone fireplace in the living room. "It's a bit dated, isn't it?" Karen had mused, tapping on the mantelpiece with a manicured nail. "A nice, clean media wall will be much more functional." Arthur, sitting in the corner, had simply closed his eyes, as if the only way to protect the memory of Eleanor warming her hands by that fire was to retreat into the darkness behind his own eyelids. The observer, the young paralegal Chloe, had been unable to shake the feeling of profound unease. She had done some digging, driven by a nagging sense of duty that went beyond her job description. Her firm's archives were digital now, but the older, pre-digital records were stored in a dusty basement. Late one evening, she had searched for property records of the house, going back to the original land purchase. The name on the deed was Arthur Thompson, as expected, but attached to it was a series of permits and architectural filings she didn't understand. They were filled with complex structural calculations and bore a stamp of approval from the city's most prestigious and historically significant engineering firm, a firm that had overseen every major municipal project for a century. The lead architect's name on all the primary blueprints was signed simply A.D. Chloe had then cross-referenced the dates with her discovery in the photograph. The bridge in the photo, Harrison Bridge, was completed the same year Arthur had filed the plans for his house. It was a small detail, a whisper of connection, but it was enough. She knew the man they were displacing was not who he seemed. She had even tried to voice her concerns to her direct superior, a senior partner at the firm. He had listened with a weary, dismissive air. "Chloe, our job is to execute the client's wishes, not to question their family dynamics. Amelia and Michael Thompson are the clients. The old man has agreed. It's done. Let it go." The escalation reached its peak the morning of the move, just before the arrival of the black cars. One of the movers, a young man with more muscle than tact, was carrying a box of books from the study. The box was old and poorly taped, and as he hoisted it onto his shoulder, the bottom gave way. Books cascaded onto the floor. Among them was a small, simple wooden box. It fell with a sharp crack, the lid popping open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a medal. It wasn't a military medal. It was large, made of heavy, burnished gold, hanging from a simple, dark blue ribbon. In the center was an intricate engraving of the city skyline, a skyline that featured the Harrison Bridge prominently. Amelia, annoyed by the delay, bent down to see what the fuss was about. She picked up the medal, her expression one of mild curiosity. "What's this supposed to be?" she asked, holding it up. Arthur, who had been watching from the doorway, took a single step into the room. His voice was low but clear. "Put it down." Amelia, enjoying her position of power, dangled it from her finger. "Ooh, a secret award? Best grandpa in the world, is it?" she taunted, her tone dripping with saccharine mockery. It was the city's gold key, a new voice said, a voice that was calm, authoritative, and utterly unexpected. The voice came from the front doorway, which now stood open. Everyone turned. The man who stood there was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that held a quiet, formidable intelligence. Behind him, standing respectfully on the porch, were two other men, similarly dressed. They were not movers. They were not family. They were something else entirely. The air in the house shifted instantly. The casual cruelty of the scene evaporated, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. The young mover who had dropped the book stood frozen, his eyes wide. David and Karen, who had been laughing at Amelia's joke, fell silent, their smiles vanishing. Michael looked from the man in the doorway to his wife, a dawning horror on his face. Amelia was the last to react, her condescending smirk slowly dissolving as she took in scene. The arrival of these men was a paradigm shift, an unexpected variable in her carefully controlled equation. The lead man's gaze was not on her. It was fixed on Arthur, and it was a gaze of profound, undisguised reverence. He took a step into the house, his expensive shoes making no sound on the hardwood floor. He ignored everyone else as if they were merely part of the furniture. He walked directly to Arthur, stopping a respectful distance away. "Arthur," he said, his voice resonating with warmth and history. "I was so sorry to hear. We came as soon as we found out." Arthur simply nodded, his face betraying nothing, but a subtle tension seemed to leave his shoulders. He was no longer alone in his fortress. The cavalry, in a form no one could predict it, had just arrived. The man who had entered was named Julian Croft. To the city, he was a titan, the founding partner of Croft and Sterling, the preeminent architectural firm in the entire state. His firm designed skyscrapers, concert halls, and university campuses. His name was synonymous with innovation, prestige, and power. To see him here, in this modest suburban house on a dreary Tuesday morning, was jarring, like seeing a lion calmly walk into a petting zoo. The tension in the room was now a physical presence, thick and suffocating. Amelia still held the gold key medal, her hand frozen in midair. Her face was a canvas of confusion and dawning apprehension. Julian Croft's eyes finally flickered toward her, and for the first time his calm expression hardened into one of cold, precise disdain. "That medal," he said, his voice dropping a few degrees, "is the highest civilian honor the city can bestow. It has been awarded exactly 3 times in the last century. Once to a pioneering heart surgeon, once to a Nobel laureate in literature, and once to the man who designed and oversaw the construction of the Harrison Bridge, the viaducts that saved the lower city from floods, and the foundational plan for the entire downtown redevelopment project. A man who did all of it not for fame or for money, but on the condition of absolute anonymity. The man you know as Arthur Thompson." The reveal was not a shout. It was a quiet, devastating detonation. The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to the ignorant reality Amelia had constructed. She looked from Croft to Arthur, her mouth slightly agape, the metal suddenly feeling as if it were burning her hand. She let it drop, and it landed on the wooden floor with a soft, metallic clink. David and Karen stared, their faces blank with shock. The young mover looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Michael took a step back, his hand covering his mouth, the full, crushing weight of his betrayal finally landing on him. He wasn't just displacing his grandfather. He was desecrating a living monument. Croft ignored their reactions. He was not there for them. He turned his full attention back to Arthur, his expression softening once more into one of deep respect. "Arthur," he said, his voice now a reverent monologue meant for an audience of one, yet delivered for all to hear. "I was a junior draftsman when you were a legend. We all were. We called you the Ghost, because you would come to the main office late at night, long after everyone else had gone home, to review the city's most complex engineering problems. You'd leave solutions on our desks, elegant, brilliant solutions to problems that had stumped teams of engineers for months, sketched on the back of a napkin or a stray piece of paper. You never took credit. You never asked for a dime. When Mayor Harrison wanted to give you the key to the city in a public ceremony, you refused. You said the work was the only reward that mattered. You said you were just a builder who wanted to make a good, strong thing. This house." Croft paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, but he wasn't seeing the stacked boxes and the signs of upheaval. He was seeing something else entirely. "This house is a masterpiece of structural design. You pioneered techniques in this very building, the load-bearing framework, the passive heating and cooling systems that became industry standards a decade later. We studied the plans for this house at the university. We just never knew who AT was. We never knew where to find you." He gestured to the leather portfolio that the mover had almost thrown away. "I would imagine that portfolio contains more architectural brilliance than my entire firm has produced in the last 20 years. Every word stripped away another layer of the caricature they had created. The stubborn old man was replaced by a quiet genius. The sentimental junk was transformed into priceless intellectual property. The outdated house was revealed to be a historic, innovative landmark. The power dynamic of the room had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. Amelia and her family were no longer the benevolent caretakers of an aging relative. They were petty, ignorant vandals, caught in the act of trying to spray paint graffiti on a national treasure. Silence, a profound, ringing silence descended upon the house, broken only by the sound of the rain outside. It was a silence of shame. The climax had been the words, the revelation of a hidden history. The falling action was the silence that followed, a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame. Amelia stood frozen, her face pale, her earlier arrogance shattered into a million pieces. She looked at Arthur, truly looked at him for the first time, and saw not an inconvenient old man, but a titan whose legacy she had been about to sweep into trash like common dust. Her brother David seemed to shrink, his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding everyone's gaze. His wife, Karen, subtly edged away from him, as if disassociated herself from the entire catastrophic misjudgment. The shame was a palpable force in the room, radiating outwards from them. Michael, the grandson, was the most visibly affected. Tears streamed down his face, silent tracks of grief and regret. He looked at his grandfather, his expression a plea for an impossible forgiveness. He had not just failed to protect him. He had actively participated in his humiliation. Julian Croft, the vindicator, let the silence hang for a long moment, allowing the full weight of the truth to settle. Then he turned to one of the men who had entered with him. "Call the university," he said, his voice calm and businesslike. "Tell Dean Matthews that we found the AT archive, and call the Historical Preservation Society. Tell them the Thompson house is secure." Amelia's head snapped up at this, a new wave of panic in her eyes. "Wait," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "This house, it's ours. We have the papers." He signed them. It was a desperate, pathetic last grasp for the reality she had created, a reality that was now dissolving like sand of flood. Chloe, the young paralegal who had been standing silently by the doorway, now stepped forward. She had been waiting, her heart pounding, ever since the black cars arrived. She held a file in her hands. "Actually," she said, her voice clear and steady, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed, "the documents Mr. Thompson signed this morning were not what you thought they were." She looked directly at Amelia, no longer intimidated. "You assumed they were a standard transfer title to you and Michael. They were not. Your firm drafted what you asked for, but I am required to provide my clients with all their options. I spoke with Mr. Thompson yesterday afternoon." She turned her respectful gaze to Arthur. He came to a different decision. The different plan from the video's title was now revealed. This was Arthur's checkmate. Chloe opened the file. The document Mr. Thompson signed today was a deed of gift. He has donated the house and all of its contents, including his personal papers and architectural drawings, to the City University School of Architecture and Urban Planning, to be preserved in perpetuity as the Arthur and Eleanor Thompson Center for Structural Innovation. It was notarized this morning. The transfer is legally complete. The house belongs to the university now. The finality of her words was absolute. Amelia hadn't taken the house from Arthur. Arthur had, with a single, quiet, brilliant move, saved the house from her. He had protected his legacy, honored his wife's memory, and ensured that the monument he had built would stand long after they were all gone. The house was never hers to give away. Her brother's family would not be moving in. The walls would not be torn down. The garden would not be paved over. Arthur's plan was not one of revenge. It was a plan of preservation, a plan of quiet, unassailable victory. He had not fought them on their terms. He had simply acted on a higher plane of honor and foresight that they were incapable of understanding. The shame on Amelia's face curdled into a mask of horrified disbelief. She had been so certain of her victory, so dismissive of his quiet compliance, that she had never once considered he might have a will, a mind, and a plan of his own. She had been outmaneuvered, not with anger or argument, but with quiet intelligence and a fountain pen. The resolution was as quiet and profound as Arthur himself. With the truth revealed and his legacy secured, a strange calm settled over him. He had won, but he took no pleasure in his victory. There was no gloating, no, "I told you so." That was not his way. Julian Croft walked over to the portfolio, lifted it with the care one would use for a holy relic, and handed it to Arthur. "We would be honored," Croft said softly, "to have you on campus, as a guest lecturer, a consultant, whatever you wish. The students need to hear your story." Arthur took the portfolio, his hand resting on the worn leather. He looked at Croft, a man of immense public stature, and gave a small, grateful nod. "Thank you, Julian," he said, "but I'm retired." He then turned and looked at his grandson. Michael was openly sobbing now, a wreck of a man broken by his own weakness. Arthur walked over to him, past the stunned and silent Amelia, and placed a hand on his shoulder. Michael flinched, unable to meet his gaze. "It's all right, son," Arthur whispered, his voice full of a sorrowful compassion that was more heartbreaking than any rebuke. "You just learn from this. Learn to see what's really there, not just what you want to see." He gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze, and then let go. He had said his piece. He had corrected the course of his legacy. His work here was done. Without another word, he walked toward the front door. He didn't take a coat. He didn't take a box of personal belongings. Everything he needed was already safe. The house was safe. Eleanor's memory was safe. The truth was safe. He walked out onto the porch and into the soft, cleansing rain, a solitary figure of immense, unadorned dignity. He paused for a moment, looking back not at the people inside, but at the house itself, at the strong brick walls and the sturdy roof. He had kept his promise to Eleanor. The house was strong enough to withstand any storm, even this one. He then walked down the gravel path, past the silent, imposing black cars, and continued down the street, his back straight, his pace unhurried. He didn't look back. The movers stood awkwardly, their job half finished, and now irrelevant. Chloe watched him go, a sense of profound awe washing over her. She had been a witness to a modern-day fable, a story of quiet heroism and loud ignorance. Inside the house, the silence was finally broken by Amelia. She let out a dry, choked sob, the sound of a person who has not only lost a material prize, but has also been forced to see the poverty of her own soul. The family she had tried to install in the sacred space was now a collection of shamed statues. The legacy she had tried to erase would now be studied by generations to come. The old man she had dismissed as a relic had proven to be more potent and enduring than her entire modern, ambitious world. His plan was different, because he was different. He operated by a code of honor she could not comprehend, a code built on the quiet, unshakable foundations of integrity, love, and a job well done. The true value of a person, like the true strength of a house, is not always visible on the surface. It is in the foundations, in the unseen framework that provides strength and endures through the ages. It is measured not in noise and bluster, but in quiet resilience and unwavering integrity. What we build with our hands and our hearts is our true legacy. What we tear down in our ignorance is our truest shame. We want to know what you think. Have you ever misjudged someone based on their quiet exterior, only to discover the depth of their character later? Share your story in the comments below. And if you believe that true strength lies in humility and honor, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that matters. The aftermath within the house was a desolate landscape of shame and broken relationships. Julian Croft and his men did not linger. Their purpose was fulfilled. They had arrived as witnesses and vindicators, and with Arthur's quiet departure, their role was complete. Croft gave a final. Withering looked to Amelia, a look that conveyed more disappointment and contempt than any verbal tirade ever could, before turning and leaving as quietly as he had arrived. The fleet of black cars pulled away, their engines a low hum that faded into the rain, leaving behind a silence that was now filled with the wreckage of a family. Chloe, the young paralegal, gathered her files. Her job was also done, but she felt a sense of profound change within herself. She had come here as a functionary, an agent of a system that was about to commit a grave injustice. She left as a keeper of a powerful truth. She gave a single, sympathetic glance at Michael, who had slumped into a chair, his face buried in his hands. There was nothing she could say, nothing anyone could say, to mend what had been broken. The chasm that opened up between what they thought they were doing and what they had actually done was too vast a bridge. Her final look was for the house itself. It seemed to breathe around her, no longer just a collection of rooms, but a living entity, a silent, stoic character in its own right, just like its creator. It had withstood the siege. Its integrity was intact. As she walked out, she saw the medal, the city's gold key, still lie on the floor where Amelia had dropped it. No one had dared to touch it. It lay there, gleaming faintly in the dim light, a silent, golden testament to the world they had failed to see. The narrative of Amelia's life had been one of control, of upward mobility, of carefully managed appearances. In a single hour, that narrative had been irrevocably torched. Her brother and his wife avoided her eyes, their earlier enthusiasm for renovation now replaced by a sour, resentful silence. They were not just embarrassed. They were implicated. Their own greed and disrespect had been laid bare for all to see. The dream of a new, spacious home was gone, replaced by the ugly reality of their own character. They gathered their children, who had fallen quiet, sensing the seismic shift in the emotional atmosphere, and left without a word of goodbye. They scurried away like scavengers frightened off a kill, leaving Amelia and Michael alone in the cavernous, half-empty living room, surrounded by the ghosts of their ambition. Michael finally looked up at his wife, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a new, cold clarity. "My grandfather," he began, his voice hoarse, "the man who raised me, you turned him into an obstacle." Amelia tried to respond, to defend, to rationalize, but no words came. What could she say? "I didn't know." It was a truth, but it was not an excuse. Her ignorance was not an accident. It was a choice. She had actively chosen not to see, not to listen, not to know the man whose life she was so casually dismantling. Her entire worldview, built on a foundation of surface-level judgments and material value, had been proven to be not just shallow, but fundamentally bankrupt. The silence between them was no longer the silence of agreement or conspiracy. It was a silence of an ending. The lesson of the day settled upon them with crushing weight. Honor is not a commodity to be bought or sold. Dignity cannot be evicted. And the true measure of a life is not in the assets one accumulates, but in the legacy one builds. Arthur had built a legacy of stone and steel, of innovation and integrity, a legacy that would now be celebrated and studied. Amelia, in her desperate pursuit of a single asset, had built a legacy of shame. And Arthur, where did he go? He didn't go to the sterile comfort of the golden sunset villas. He was seen, later that day, by Julian Croft, who had gone looking for him. He found him in the city's public library, in the architecture section, sitting at a simple wooden table. The leather portfolio was on the table in front of him. He wasn't looking at it. He was looking out the large window, at the city skyline he had helped to shape, his expression calm and contemplative. He had returned not to a house, but to his work, his true home. He was a builder, and there was always more to build. Let us reflect on the quiet power that resides in humility. In a world that screams for attention, that values volume over substance, the story of Arthur Thompson is a powerful counter-narrative. He sought no stage, no applause, no public recognition. His greatness was not performed. It was simply lived. He poured his genius not into self-promotion, but into the foundations of his community, into the very structures that made life better, safer, and more beautiful for thousands of people he would never meet. His reward was not a plaque with his name on it, but the quiet satisfaction of a problem elegantly solved, of a promise honorably kept. He built his masterpiece of a house as a sanctuary for his love, and when that love was threatened by the very people who should have been its staunchest guardians, he protected it not with rage, but with wisdom. His plan was not a scheme for revenge. It was an act of profound love. He did not seek to punish Amelia and Michael for their ignorance, but rather to place his life's work and the memory of his beloved Eleanor beyond the reach of that ignorance. He elevated his legacy into the public trust, transforming a personal treasure into a shared gift. This is the ultimate power of the quiet hero. They do not engage in the petty squabbles of the world. They operate on a different plane, guided by an internal compass of integrity that others, blinded by their own ambitions, cannot see. While Amelia was busy with the logistics of eviction, Arthur was concerned with the preservation of history. While she was focused on the monetary value of a property, he was focused on the intrinsic value of a life's work. Her plan was small, temporary, and built on a foundation agreed. His plan was vast, permanent, and built on a foundation of love. The antagonists in this story, Amelia and her family, are not merely villains. They are a warning. They represent a mindset that is all too common. The tendency to judge others based on superficial metrics, age, wealth, perceived utility. They looked at Arthur and saw a liability, a problem to be managed. They failed to see the history in his eyes, the strength in his calloused hands, the genius in his quiet mind. Their disrespect was a symptom of a deeper blindness, an inability to recognize worth when it does not announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. They learned, too late, that you cannot measure a soul with a balance sheet. You cannot appraise a legacy like a piece of real estate. The silence of a dignified man is not emptiness. It is often a space filled with wisdom, strength, and profound understanding of what truly matters. We must ask ourselves, how often do we make the same mistake? How often do we dismiss the quiet ones, the humble ones, the ones who do not demand our attention? How much wisdom, how much history, how much quiet heroism do we overlook every single day because we are too busy listening to the loudest voices? Arthur's story is a call to look deeper, to listen more carefully, to approach every human being with the reverence one would get a library of unknown books. For within each person is a story of triumphs and sorrows, of love and loss, of lessons learned and legacies built. His final act of walking away, not in defeat, but in quiet triumph, is perhaps the most powerful lesson of all. He did not need to stay and watch his antagonists crumble. Their shame was their own to carry. His victory was not in their defeat, but in the successful preservation of his honor and his work. He left them to their silence and walked back into the world he had helped to build, a world that was, in a very real sense, his true and lasting home. The rain that fell on him was not a sorrowful rain, but cleansing one, washing away the dust of the conflict and leaving only the clean, strong lines of the truth. He was, and always had been, a man who built things to last. And in the end, his character proved to be the strongest structure of all.